Hi,
Yep.
I'm Patricia Greenberg, and this is It's Okay to Be Old. My guest today is Caytha Jentis, and she's the founder of Fox Meadow Films. She's a writer, director, and producer of films, plays, and short series such as And Then Came Love, The Other F Word, Bad Parents, and Pulling to Paradise. Her stories challenge the old tropes of motherhood with pathos and heightened reality humor. Her stage play, Sex Work, Sex Play, had a successful off Broadway run in the fall of 2023. Welcome, Caytha.
Well, welcome. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here on your show, Patricia.
Caytha, I always like to talk about, to me, because we talk about aging and getting older and all the wonderful aspects of that, pro aging. I always like to mention the friendships that form in the course of doing this work. And I was introduced to you and your work through three different avenues. And I just mentioned that because I do want to shout out to the people that brought us together. And we become our own kind of community of people, both online and in person, and just in the atmosphere, right? We're all together in this, and so it's important to highlight that. Jeannie Ralston of Next Tribe, Leslie Jane Seymour of the Covey Club, and Melissa Davey, who's an extraordinary filmmaker, who she also started her film career at 65 and is now winning numerous awards in the indie film circuit. What strikes me about that is we all seem to be converging into this place of support and empowerment of allowing older women and men, for that matter, to flourish in careers and hobbies and life in ways that were once considered undignified, right, for those of a certain age. And boy, has that been debunked in recent years. So, what do you think is driving that change in how well aging is being accepted by society?
Well, I feel, first of all, I do think it's slightly demographic driven because, the baby boomers was such a large generation. And I do think some of us are on different levels of the spectrum of where we fit in the baby boomers. But I do think, I think from health and wellness, we are aging in a healthier way. And I just think, we've looked at it differently, how we live our lives and how we want to continue because we are living older. And I do think, which I know you believe too, with our bodies, if you use it, you won't lose it.
Right.
And that's what's, important. And again, I do feel like we're sister in arms of the people that you've talked about. And Melissa, just to add that in, I met really through you, through Judith as well. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to know Melissa.
Yeah. So it's a wonderful, wonderful convergence. Now, why I talk about what's undignified is these behaviors and these athletic feats that we're taking on later in life were once thought to be, it was horrifying that somebody over 30 would be doing that. I say here we are in our 50s, 60s, and 70s doing incredible, incredible things with our bodies, with our mind, and the way we see the world and our place in the world. And you have become an aerialist. Tell us about it. Tell us what it is, how you got interested, because now it's popular and you're putting on performances.
Yeah, well, I mean, and just to put a pin in the aerial is to get to
Yes.
that, when you talk about, I mean, for some reason, and that was, I've just chosen to live, which I go to young in living your most, the individuation where you're living your most authentic self. And I feel that is something that we do in midlife. But I mean, just to that, how when for Leslie, I wrote an essay. I art modeled in my mid 50s.
Okay.
That was Ariel is nothing. I mean, I was, which was kind of how you deal with like the invisibility that many
Yes.
people at this age. I'm like, I'm just going to be an art model and pose and let young painters draw me, which was kind of a fun experience. But to Ariel, I would kind of was there were, there had been a bunch of strikes in the movie business, which is sort of my background in theater. I mean, there's a lot of industry challenges as well as challenges as an older woman in these spaces. And I'd always been a fan of performance art and had been to many shows that included aerialists beyond things like Cirque du Soleil. I mean, really in the downtown New York and Brooklyn scene. And then one day I was like, you know what? I want to try that. And that kind of began, which was pretty much a year ago today, around this time in my early 60s, because I started filmmaking in my 40s. And again, that was considered old by the movie
Oh,
business.
sure. Yeah.
And so, and then I was just like, this is something I want to try. And I found it as a really interesting way to kind of be creative differently. And like similar to you, I had run some marathons and I've always been an athlete, but I've never been a dancer. And this was because it really is aerial dance. I mean, there's elements of gymnastics and like all sports, it requires strength, but I've never been a graceful person. I've never been a dancer. So I sort of feel like this ugly duckling experience in my early 60s of, learning grace, more or less.
You're performing and you're putting together performances, and you've built a tribe around that as well
Yeah.
now, which is absolutely amazing. And the women you're performing with all have extraordinary stories themselves, and they talk about how empowering this is. I want to ask you the nuts and bolts. What does it feel like to hang upside down and spin and put yourself in a position that most of us feel is very dangerous?
Well, I mean, I think it's like anything. I mean, it is dangerous if you don't know your body and trust your body. And I have to say, like, initially it was hard, but I mean, you totally crawl before you walk or before you spin or before you do the advanced skills. And all these programs are very much not letting you progress till they think you're physically ready. So I want to be clear. Um, there's elements that can be dangerous, like skiing or anything else that you do physical. I mean, people get injuries playing pickleball.
Sure.
So anyway, I was facing a lot of, I mean, I have like spin tolerance issues. I get nauseous. So the spinning is a challenge, but I happen to be very strong. So that has sort of helped me. And it's in the aging space, which is cute. I was at a class recently, and at the end, like they know, oh, Caytha's the strong one. And this young person, probably in her like late 20s, like was like after the class, she goes, oh, when I'm older, I want to be strong like you.
Yeah.
And I don't think of that's anything that anybody really says as an advantage to age is to be stronger. So I
Right.
think dispelling myths, that was really a very empowering to me of like that how I'm dispelling a myth that you can be stronger with age.
Absolutely. And this is what we're learning now in both science and medicine. And just anecdotally, when you go to the gym, there's people who can bodybuild in their 60s and 70s, and people can go from a place of weakness to extreme
Yep.
strength. And this is why we talk about something as simple as getting in and out of your chair without your hands and getting
Yep.
off the floor, and these things that were once reserved for just physical therapy. Now we're finding throughout every aspect of your life is paying attention to how strong you are at any
Well,
age.
oh, sorry. I was just going to say to your thing about standing up. I mean, and also breaking your hip is like one of the leading causes of death to older people. So as much as we keep some sort of, kind of in the strength training, physical fitness, as well as flexibility and working on that stuff. I mean, it does extend our life and keeps, like again, you were talking about injury. I do think a lot of what I'm doing, which is building flexibility and strength, is actually, very much good for my health.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And your psyche,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
your
yeah.
emotional, all of it. It's absolutely amazing for every aspect of your life. And your work is about freeing oneself up to be open physically, emotionally, spiritually, sexually. I imagine it's very healing for you and also for your audience. And talk to me about how you experienced ageism in your journey of celebrating women over 50.
Well, I mean, it's no secret, but so when I made my first film in my early 40s, my kids were in middle school because I'd worked in the movie business when I was before kids and then kind of took a little hiatus or whatever and moved back east. And, coming back, it was like starting from scratch. And, people are like, oh, you're making a movie in your 40s. And again, this was 20 or so years ago. Now more older people are doing it, but especially then it was like, that's what kids do.
Right.
But it helped me then get people to be allies because they're like,
Yeah.
oh, you're going to do that? How can I help? So, and that's what I think it is to what you had talked about. Is finding these allies. But I did ultimately with the gatekeepers in Hollywood, where I had success. That first film, And Then Came Love, had Vanessa Williams and Eartha Kitt. I got to deal with Warner Brothers, and I was like, oh, I'm back in the industry, and I couldn't get like the representation, like agents from all my, like Bad Parents was another film which I did with a lot of named comedians that has played on every major platform. And after every film, I'm like, this is the one that's going to get me the agent that's going to make it easier, or the producing partner that can, basically raise the money. And I couldn't. And, at first, I kind of, oh, that's how hard the industry was. But then when I did that project, The Other F Word, which was a series about women in midlife. And that was actually one of my like favorite and like project. And that's why which I learned, studied midlife. And it was really more like Girls, like where I thought was a TV show at the time, which was about young women finding themselves. And I was like, well, I feel like their mothers or the middle-aged people, we're really finding ourselves at this stage. And that's why I think what you were talking about through all these women's communities, like, and what I would say, like, when you're young, you live for your parents, you live for your teachers. If you have a partner, you're living for them, you live for your boss, you live for your kids if you have them. And then I felt like in midlife, you're finally living for yourself. And then that's what I wanted to deal with in my series. But what does that look like? And that is what many of us are, struggling to find, but realizing that we have wisdom. And that is, I think, younger people do look up to us. And that's why when you're talking about the stories that these people who've been doing aerial, like that I've met that are older, like older people have stories. And it's about not just ignoring their stories, it's hearing their stories and learning and enjoying the history of their lives.
It Can I ask you about your recruitment process? I mean, do you go to classes? Is there aerialist schools and
Oh,
circus training and acrobats running around that I'd imagine like everything, like, whatever our hobbies are things we're avid and passionate about. There's always a whole world of people doing that. So tell me about that world a little bit.
yeah. Well, so I mean, even in the backstory of that, when I was in my like mid 40s, I was I was a sales rep, and I won a sales incentive, which we all got to go to Club Med,
Mm.
and they had the flying trapeze there. And so I did that. And, and that was, again, very beginnery, but I got a little bit more advanced, and I'm like, I want to do this. I want to come back and I want to run away and join the circus. And they didn't really have the circus schools that they do now. So I kind of put that aside. And again, it was like more of a mom fantasy. I want to just run away and join the circus and do
Yep.
and so,
Yeah.
and so anyway, then, did the films. And then I had seen these aerialists performing, and just for something, I was like, you know what? I want to try that. And I did find these aerial schools, these circus schools, or, these, and I mean, I live on the Upper West Side. There were two places in Midtown that was like, 3 subway stops away. It's by two places are by Penn Station. And when I walked in the first time, to sign up for the class, I kind of was thinking, okay, I'm probably going to be the oldest person here. And that has never deterred me. I was like, oh, well, been there, done that. So I just kind of walked into the class, and, I kind of was, and I sort of owned it to the teacher. I'm like, yeah, I'm probably older than most everybody else. And the first thing they said is, actually, be surprised, you're not. There are many other people who are doing this that, and at the time it was really funny because they're like, who are even in their 60s. I'm like, yeah, well,
Oh, wow.
but I'm not going to tell you that. You
Yeah,
can tell
yeah,
me in my
yeah,
50s.
yeah.
And so, but regardless, I have never I've never let, because again, all these venues I've been to, lots of times I'm on the older side, but I did find if you feel you belong, then you belong. And I think that is what holds a lot of older people back is their own, they hold themselves back. They say, I'm too old for
That's right.
doing this, whatever it is. I mean, it can be like, and again, I know through the films and the things I've done, I've inspired people not to do what I'm doing, but they're like, well, if Caytha's doing this, like a friend of mine started painting in a serious way because she's like, you know what? I'm going to be vulnerable. Caytha's vulnerable. I'm going to paint. And she, got her art in shows. And it was a very gratifying thing for her. And a lot of it was like, oh, where people not necessarily want to do what I'm doing, but that's how we are sort of leading or being good, like not leading, but being good examples.
Right.
And that's how I felt like, and in that thing, it's vulnerability. Like I'm not afraid of, making a fool out of myself or failing to achieve something. So that is, especially when I signed up for the first performance that I did or the one performance, many people are like, oh my God, I'm not good enough to perform. I'm not. And I was just like, no, I think if you enjoy it, like you will, like nobody knows how, like whether how advanced you are, you just sort of own it. And that's, how I feel with the things I've done. And I have many friends of all ages, through Ariel, but but then I was seeking out others of my generation as well, like having the younger ones where I feel like, there's all the drag mothers. I feel like I'm the Ariel mama to all of them,
Yeah.
just emotionally, like we have these nice friendships. And so that was why, I wanted to find others who are doing it later in life to create a separate little community amongst us because, most of us there are those who've kind of been dancers in their youth and have evolved into us, but there were several of us who just kind of started later in life. And, we have our own little sisterhood.
It's amazing. And it gets back to what I always say, you can do, almost anything at any age. If, it's worth trying. You said you're not afraid to fail. None of it's a failure. You're just starting and if it doesn't work, you're on to the next thing. It's not even, I always say there are lessons in life. We use the word failure, but it isn't even that.
Oh, well, I mean, I agree
Yeah,
with
no,
you.
no, no. I understand.
Yeah.
And the cover work of my last book, the woman Nancy Mills, who did the artwork. My brother's an art dealer in Chicago and Los Angeles, and he came upon it. He goes, "How do you like this for the cover of the book?" I said, "It's perfect. It's beautiful. It speaks to everything I want to say." And who is it? He goes, "It's an artist who's 75, and she painted as a little kid and hasn't picked up a paintbrush in 65 years." Picked it up and now she's selling her artwork all over the world. So this is just another example. I like bringing in these. That's exactly right. So try it. If you don't like it, go on to the next thing. There's everything about life should be enjoy and an adventure. And the sorrow and the hard times that come should be countered by doing the things we love and making us happy. And just like you say, just try. Caytha, you have two children. That's a juggling act onto itself. How old are they now, and do they embrace?
Oh, they're in their early 30s. They're in their early
Okay,
30s now. They're
okay,
grown up.
okay. And how do they feel about what you're doing?
Well, again, I feel like because my sort of finding my authentic self did start when they were older, because
Yeah,
I did feel and many of us felt like we were not, kind of going through being this mother. And
right.
then I think when we became ourselves after being mom or connected to somebody, then, so I think they're just used, like, they just take it like that's what mom does.
Yes.
And again, like, I mean, my daughter lived in San Francisco for 6 years and I visited her and we were in Haight-Ashbury and she saw these like wild, like platform drag boots. And she's like, oh, mom, those are you. So like, it's like, and I bought them and they are me.
Yeah,
And I
that's
wear them.
funny. That's
And
great.
so, yeah, I think and I do think like I have a very close relationship with them because I'm still a mother. Like I'm not like a cool mom per se, but I'm very much I'm very much me and have so I just think they embrace it. I mean, my nickname when they were younger was Crazy Lady, so they're like, so it's kind of the extension in the effect. Oh, there goes, yeah, there's Crazy.
Crazy lady again. Yeah.
Crazy
Mhm.
Lady.
That's great.
So
So they're flourishing and doing well. That's very, very nice to hear.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a whole nother story of their
Yes.
childhood,
Yes.
but they
Yes.
go
Oh, of
to the
course.
other side.
Tell me about it. I know. I know. So I wanted to move on that you recently co-chaired the Gold Standard Arts Festival. It's a week-long festival that celebrates film, theater, and comedy. Tell us about that.
Well, yeah, so my producing partner, so like I said, I did that TV show called The Other F Word,
Mhm.
which was a show about, women in midlife. And that's kind of how I connected with, especially Leslie Jane Seymour, because she was at More Magazine at the time and dealing with similar challenges of butting into advertisers being afraid of this demographic.
Yeah. Mhm.
And so I had this incredibly successful kind of web series because that was popular, and I got like name people that would be in it because they're like, we support your taking on this tough demographic, and that's what they called it. They're like, oh, your show's about women turning 50, that's a tough demographic. And then they pulled me right, that's code for ageism
Yes.
because
Yes.
the advertisers are so afraid of this demographic because they're afraid that their sexy product is going to have depends ads because that's what they think of with if you're 50. And this was again more like 10 years ago. I do think it's evolved. And so it was at the end of the pandemic, and Eileen and I had produced it. It was very successful, but we could never get into the next level of turning it into a half-hour show, which was our ultimate goal.
Mm.
And we're like, you know what? There's all these kind of arts and film festivals that celebrate marginalized group, like niche festivals.
Right.
And I said, there's no niche festivals that celebrates older people like that. Like I go, that group, kind of marginalized, hasn't been celebrated. So we decided to do a festival, which we did, I guess like it was like 2 or 3 years ago, this week-long festival. We partnered with a nonprofit on the Upper West Side, and we kind of wanted to do it multidisciplinary. So, we did have a 3-day film festival. We had stage plays. All the playwrights were we did short plays over 50. We did stand up. I mean, that we couldn't stop. Like more like all these like famous stand-up comedians were like, wait, we want to do a set. So we had that, and we had jazz and cabaret. And but to kind of what you were saying before, what we learned initially, we were like, we want to celebrate artists over 50 because we were in our 50s and feeling marginalized as like early older people.
Yeah.
So we were imagining we were the 50s, 60s. Then we met so many vibrant, still like relevant artists in their 80s and 90s, and the stories that they had to tell, and we were blown away. And so for us, we're like, wait, you could still do this in your 80s and 90s. So they
Mm.
became our role models. And we kind of came up with this sort of tagline that art enhances and extends life. And to us, that's what we believed as artists, is that it's it sort of makes you ageless because and to me it's to what you said, it's this passion. Like it doesn't have, it could be gardening, it doesn't matter. But if you have this kind of creative passion, it just, I think it just makes you feel, it's an endorphin, like it makes you feel better. And that's what we thought. It can, you connect through art, and it enhances and extends life. And especially to me in a place like New York City, I mean, these were cabaret guys, like still getting booked at 80s
Yeah.
and 90s
Yeah.
and performing as long as they could. So, so then to where I am with the aerial. So we did the festival. It was very successful, but it was a huge undertaking. So then we started doing smaller projects where we did some short films. And there was this Nancy Brandon, who is in her 90s and a painter and kind of an accidental painter.
Mhm.
And that started, when she retired from being like an art teacher. And she, wasn't trained. And so then when I started doing the aerial and I started meeting others, I was like, oh, let's do, because I'd seen some documentaries about, and then the Miami Heat. I'm like, okay, they're older, um, women in particular who were, doing dance corps and they were like being, I'm like, wait, what about older people who are doing these circus arts? I go,
Yes.
that would be a really interesting space because it is like you don't really see age, and that's what's really cool. So I did a short film with my friends, which were more the amateur aerialists. And that's where we had this, the stories where they kind of told a little bit how they came to it. And we did a short kind of proof of concept that we're sending to some festivals. And then I had the bigger project. I'm like, you know what? I want to do an event similar to other things because, again, as a producer, I was like, I want to have the documentary as well as a live event. And so I went to Eileen, and then I had met Melissa through watching her at your event.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I wonder if she'd be open to directing a documentary based on this. And she did because, all her projects celebrate older
Yes.
people doing things, unexpected things. And so, we've formed this kind of collaboration where we're going to have an event on April 2nd at the Slipper Room in New York City, where I partnered with Let Them Eat Cake, which does monthly shows. One of my aerial instructors is one of the runs that. And I reached out to professional and high-level amateur aerialists to see if they would participate. So we have, and a couple of men, we have 9 high-level circus aerial performers who are going to be performing on April 2nd. I will be in it too, as the lowest, highest.
Mhm.
And it's cabaret, it's circus, it's aerial, and it's going to be, and our theme is 80s music because I thought that spoke to the generation.
Yes, amazing. I wish you the absolute best with
Thanks.
this. This is so again, for more information, what's the best place to go to get tickets and
Well, the tickets for the event will be on the Slipper Rooms website. I
okay.
also have a Gold Standard Arts Festival website,
Okay.
which is one of the, it's on
Yeah,
there.
and
It'll be,
we'll post that when we post the show as well.
and then we'll have also, that's where you could see the sizzle, the sizzle reel that Melissa's directing,
Okay.
and the longer piece when it's done.
And that I'm so looking forward to. Caytha, there's so much life to live at any age. And what do you say to women who are 50 or over and they're feeling insecure about stepping out, trying new things, especially physically challenging feats? What is your advice to them?
Well, I mean, I had this thing of like no fear, like as my tagline. And I also think it's like there's like why, and then you just say why not? And I've always thought when I'm really at the end of my life and I reflect back, most likely I'll regret what I didn't do versus what I did do.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing is, we want to say when we look back, I always say, stay in today, work on your self-esteem, work on loving yourself, and that'll open your world to wanting to try new things, right? It's just like, how do you feel about yourself today? What is it you want to try new? What is it you want to challenge yourself to?
Yeah, and I just want to go back to that young thing that I said
Yes.
because
Yeah.
I'm a big, I was reading a lot of Jungian philosophy and psychology, and that is what individuation is. Like it's taking the mask off, and because he believed it's like the self-love is accepting yourself for who you are. And it's not in a vanity way, it's just this is who I am. I'm comfortable and confident, and then having the self-love from that point, from that perspective.
Yeah, they all tie into each other, but that's a beautiful closing statement. Lastly, I always like to ask all my guests, what do you like about getting older?
Well, I think I like about that, I feel that I'm living for myself without worrying about what other people think.
Mhm. Yeah, that's the bottom line. Do not care about what anybody thinks, says, does it, your life is you, and that's it. That's my opening line and everything. Just stop
Yeah.
caring what people think, because it doesn't matter. You want to know the truth? They care for a minute, they'll gossip for a minute, they'll judge you for a minute, and then they're on to the next thing. And you're spending too much time on that. You're giving too much energy to what other people are saying or doing.
Yeah.
So I can't thank you enough for being here, joining me on It's Okay to Be Old. Such a pleasure to have you here and talk about, how you help all of us feel empowered. And for more information about Caytha Jentis and her upcoming events, you can go to her website, which is www.caytha.com. Do I have that right?
That is it.
CTHA. And then, of course, for the event coming up is Golden Standard
A
Arts
gold standard arts.
Gold Standard Arts Festival.org, and we will post that on the page as well. And again, I want to thank all of you for listening, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Patricia Greenberg. It's Okay to Be Old. And for more information or feedback, you can contact me at www.patriciagreenberg.com. Again, Caytha, thank you so much for being
Well,
here.
and thank you so much for having me on your show. I just feel it was, great kismet that we found each other. So thank you.
Thank you. Stay well and stay safe.
You too.